Have you ever noticed that the most genuinely captivating people are often not the ones who speak the most, stand out the most, or try the hardest to impress? They do not need to occupy space, prove how interesting they are, or demand constant attention. Yet when they appear, the atmosphere subtly changes. Others listen more carefully, breathe more softly, and unconsciously feel safer. It is a very peculiar kind of attraction, quiet, enduring, and difficult to imitate. In the modern world, we are taught that to be attractive, we must express ourselves, our personality, our energy, our success, our identity. But the more we try to express ourselves, the easier it becomes to drift away from ourselves. Silent attraction, in a Jungian sense, is not a communication technique or a psychological strategy. It is the natural consequence of a long inner process, standing firmly in inner independence, reconciling with the shadow, respecting silence, maintaining healthy boundaries, cultivating compassion, and living at a pace slow enough that we do not betray ourselves. When the inner world is in order, the outer demeanor naturally becomes grounded. You do not need to do anything extra to attract. You simply need to stop acting against yourself. In this video, we will explore the social habits that create this silent attraction through the lens of Carl Jung's psychology. This is not a list of tips to become likable more quickly, but a set of qualities formed from depth. If you have ever wondered why some people do not try to be attractive, yet remain unforgettable, this journey is for you. Perhaps you will discover that the attraction you have been seeking outside has always existed within, not something to be created, only something to be lived fully and truthfully. Number 1. Inner independence, the root of attraction. There is a great paradox in modern social life. The more we live among crowds, the more we crave recognition, and the more we crave recognition, the more invisible we become. We learn to say what others want to hear, to behave according to accepted molds in order to be liked, to adjust ourselves so that we fit in. Yet deep inside, the sense of emptiness remains. Carl Jung saw this paradox very clearly. He did not call it a social problem, but a sign of an immature ego, an ego still living off external reflection. And it is precisely here that the story of silent attraction begins, not with communication skills, not with appearance or speech, but with something far deeper: inner independence. Inner independence does not mean isolation. An independent person is not someone who shuts themselves off from the world, becomes cold or distant. On the contrary, they still connect, still love, still participate in relationships, but they do not trade themselves for acceptance. They do not need constant agreement to feel worthy. They enter the world with an inner axis already established, rather than revolving around someone else's axis. This is what creates a very particular kind of attraction, not loud, not pleading, yet naturally drawing attention. Imagine a compass. When the needle is stable, it always points in one direction, regardless of wind or terrain. But when the needle is distorted, it spins chaotically with every small influence. Human beings are much the same. A person without inner independence lives like a lost compass needle, constantly reacting to praise, criticism, attention, or neglect. They brighten when recognized and collapse when ignored. Meanwhile, a person with inner independence resembles a steady compass. They still sense the world, but they are not pulled off course by it. And paradoxically, it is precisely this steadiness that becomes the most attractive quality. I once knew a man working in a creative environment where everyone was trying to stand out, to speak more, to present their ideas impressively in order to be noticed. He was not the most conspicuous person in the room. He spoke little, did not interrupt, did not try to prove his intelligence. Yet, whenever he spoke, the entire room fell quiet. Not because his words were particularly ornate, but because they carried no need for validation. He did not speak to impress, but because something genuinely needed to be said. Over time, people began to gravitate toward him, not to be praised or agreed with, but because they sensed in him a rare solidity. He did not need to be chosen, and precisely for that reason, he became the one everyone wanted to choose. Carl Jung called this state the beginning of individuation, the process of returning to one's true self. When the ego matures, it no longer lives off social reflection. It no longer constantly asks, "What do others think of me?" but instead asks, "Is this true for me?" This shift may seem subtle, but it profoundly transforms one's presence. A person who does not need to be chosen sends out a very clear signal. They are not here to ask for a place. They already have their own. Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. To become yourself, there is no other path than separating your sense of worth from the gaze of others. When you live on approval, you hand over the authority to define yourself to the world. And the world is always changing, inconsistent, and contradictory. Nothing erodes attraction faster than constantly reshaping yourself to satisfy external standards. Inner independence is the core foundation of attraction. You may polish your outward image, learn to speak skillfully, smile at the right moments, behave gracefully. But if inside you remain fragile, still governed by the fear of abandonment or rejection, everything remains superficial. Others may not consciously identify it, but they can always sense the strain. Conversely, when inner independence is established, you no longer need to seek attention. The way you speak, the way you remain silent, the way you show up, all become natural, because your energy radiates on its own, without calling for proof. In society, we are often taught that we must be chosen to have value, chosen by a group, chosen as a partner, chosen at work, chosen to be loved. Jung saw this differently. When you do not need to be chosen, that is when you truly have value, because then you enter relationships not from lack, but from sufficiency. You do not need another person to validate your existence, and that, in turn, creates a sense of safety that others unconsciously seek. There is a beautiful metaphor for this state: a mountain standing still in a valley. It does not chase the river, does not beg for rain, does not need admiration. Yet clouds gather around it, birds return to it, and people, when tired, naturally lift their eyes toward it. The mountain is not attractive because it tries to be, but because it simply is. Inner independence creates the same effect in social life. You do not need to be the center, but you become a point of grounding. Importantly, inner independence does not make you distant or cold. On the contrary, it allows you to be more genuinely present. When you do not need approval, you listen more deeply, because you are not preoccupied with how you appear. When you do not need to be chosen, you love without control or manipulation. And this freedom makes relationships feel lighter, more breathable. Others feel safe around you because they are not pulled into your unconscious needs. If you wish to cultivate inner independence, begin with very small things. Observe how you react when you are not noticed. Do you rush to speak more, do more, prove more? Practice pausing. Allow yourself to feel the discomfort without immediately filling it. That is the moment you begin to separate yourself from social reflection. Learn to make choices not out of fear of being overlooked, but because they align with your values. Each time you do this, your inner foundation strengthens a little more. Silent attraction does not come from what you do for others to see, but from no longer needing others to see you. When you stand firmly within yourself, you walk more slowly, speak less, but every gesture carries weight. Others may not be able to explain why they feel drawn to you, but they sense it clearly. There is something in you that does not depend, does not beg, does not panic. And in an anxious world, that is the most powerful form of attraction. Inner independence is the first step, and also the foundation for all the qualities of attraction that follow. Once your inner axis is established, you no longer need to perform, to boast, or to impress. From here, the real journey begins. Because after standing firmly, the next step is not to make yourself bigger, but to learn humility, so that true value can shine without advertisement. Number 2. Genuine humility, strength without display. When a person begins to stand firmly on the axis of inner independence, a subtle change occurs. They no longer feel compelled to prove themselves, not because they lack ambition or ability, but because a different kind of certainty has emerged within them, certainty about their own worth. And from this point, a new and quietly powerful quality of attraction is born, genuine humility. In everyday life, the word humility often evokes images of shrinking oneself, excessive modesty, or downplaying one's value to make others comfortable. But this is not humility in the Jungian psychological sense. Humility is not the denial of one's worth, nor is it an act of making oneself small to be liked. Genuine humility is the state of an ego that is secure enough not to display itself. It is the calm of someone who knows who they are and therefore does not need to constantly remind others. Carl Jung believed that most people live through the persona, the social mask we wear to adapt, to be accepted, to maintain a proper image. The persona is not inherently negative. It is a necessary tool for functioning in society. The problem arises when the ego completely identifies with the persona, when we believe that we are the image being performed. At that point, every interaction becomes a stage. We speak to impress, act to be recognized, behave to preserve an image. And the more we protect the mask, the more exhausted we become, because a single doubtful glance or misplaced evaluation can collapse our entire sense of worth. Genuine humility appears when the persona begins to thin, not disappear, but no longer dominate. The ego no longer needs to defend itself constantly, no longer needs to construct images to shield inner insecurity. A humble person does not speak much about themselves because they are no longer afraid of being forgotten if they do not. As a result, they create a very different kind of presence, light, grounded, and trustworthy. Imagine a room filled with bright lights, where everyone is trying to make their own light shine brighter than the others. The lights overlap, glare, and eventually no one can see clearly. But in a corner of the room, there is someone who does not add another light, who simply stands there. Strangely, that person becomes the most noticeable. Not because they shine more, but because they do not participate in the competition of brightness. Genuine humility works the same way. It is not turning off value, but not needing to display it. In social life, this difference is easy to observe. There are people who constantly talk about their achievements, the places they have been, the connections they have. At first, this may be impressive, but very quickly it begins to feel heavy, as if they are carrying an invisible burden, the burden of needing to be acknowledged. By contrast, there are people who rarely speak about themselves, yet when they appear, the atmosphere shifts. They listen more than they speak, respond just enough, do not interrupt. And strangely, we become curious about them, wanting to know how they think and live. This attraction does not come from the information they provide, but from the absence of a need to prove. I once met a woman named Anna in a group therapy setting. She sat quietly among others. She held a high social position, something people only discovered later, because she never mentioned it. When it was her turn to speak, Anna did not use grand terms or talk about achievements or roles. She spoke about the exhaustion of always having to be right, always appearing strong in front of others, and the rare relief of being able to sit there without having to perform. She spoke slowly, paused naturally, and did not seek agreement. After the session, many were surprised to learn about her social status, and what impressed them was not the status itself, but the fact that she did not need to use it to create distance or influence. Her humility did not come from diminishing herself, but from an ego strong enough not to prove. That calm presence made others feel safe and unconsciously drawn to her. Jung emphasized that true strength does not lie in display, but in the capacity to endure the truth about oneself. Those who need to boast are often those who have not reconciled with an inner sense of lack. They use expression as armor to hide the fear of being seen as not enough. Humility in this sense is not a moral virtue, but a psychological outcome of an ego strong enough not to protect itself with images. When you no longer need to defend, you no longer need to attack. One of Jung's well-known statements captures this spirit. Through pride, we are ever deceiving ourselves. But deep down below the surface of the average conscience, a still, small voice says to us, something is out of tune. Pride, no matter how refined, is still a form of self-deception. And when a person no longer needs that deception, humility arises naturally, not through effort, but through the absence of a need to display. In relationships, genuine humility creates safety. Someone who does not need to prove themselves, does not impose, compete subtly, or seek dominance. Around them, we are not drawn into invisible comparisons. We are allowed to be ourselves without defense. That feeling is what makes people want to stay longer. They do not feel they must be good enough to deserve the other person, because the other person does not use value as a measuring stick. This also explains why people with silent attraction often do not stand out immediately, but become more captivating the longer you know them. Their humility does not impress quickly, but it creates depth. It is like an underground stream, quiet, but nourishing an entire landscape. Those who display themselves may capture attention for a moment, but the humble leave a lasting presence in the mind. Genuine humility does not make you smaller. On the contrary, it frees you from the burden of having to appear big. When you no longer have to protect a mask, you have more energy to listen, to connect, to live truthfully. And from that state, silent attraction continues to deepen, not through effort, but through authenticity. Once inner independence is established and genuine humility begins to emerge, a person enters another stage of attraction, not captivating through prominence, but through unassuming solidity. From this foundation, the next qualities can develop in a healthy way. Because only when the ego no longer has to strain to be seen does it become free to care for, nurture, and respect the life within. Number 3. Respecting silence. Have you ever wondered what happens when you no longer feel the need to fill every gap with words or reactions? After inner independence is established and genuine humility begins to appear, people often enter a more subtle stage of attraction: the ability to respect silence. This is not silence as a tactic, nor an attitude of withdrawal or avoidance, but a form of inner stillness that has found its footing. Such a person does not panic when not speaking, does not grow restless when a conversation slows, and does not feel they are losing presence simply because they are not constantly responding. In a society where speed, quick reactions, and constant visibility are seen as markers of value, the ability to remain at ease within silence becomes a rare quality and therefore deeply attractive. Silence, in a Jungian sense, is never empty. It only appears empty to an ego that has not learned to face itself. When sound fades and external feedback disappears, those still dependent on social reflection immediately feel anxious. They speak more, explain more, laugh more, as a way to reassure themselves that they still exist in others' eyes. But for someone who has an inner axis, silence is familiar territory. There, they do not need to perform, defend, or maintain an image. They simply are. And it is precisely this unfiltered presence that creates depth. In Eastern literature, there is a story in Zhuangzi that closely mirrors this state. Zhuangzi tells of a woodworker whose creations were said to possess a special spirit. When asked why, he replied that before beginning his work, he spent several days simply sitting, not thinking about reputation, profit, or others' opinions. When all notions of self and other had settled, his hands knew what to do. This story is not about craftsmanship, but about a psychological state. Only when the mind is sufficiently still can action carry life. The woodworker is not captivating because he tries to create something special, but because he does not allow inner disturbances to interfere with his presence. Silence here is not absence, but the condition for essence to emerge. Carl Jung approached this from a deeper psychological angle. He believed that the unconscious does not communicate in the noisy language of rationality. It does not argue, explain, or persuade. It expresses itself through images, sensations, and intuitions, and can often only be perceived when consciousness steps back. When a person cannot tolerate silence, they also cannot access their unconscious, because consciousness constantly occupies all the space. Jung emphasized that many psychological disturbances do not arise from unconscious content itself, but from the fact that people do not allow the unconscious any room to speak. He wrote, "The unconscious is not just evil by nature, it is also the source of the highest good." This statement is often understood abstractly, but in everyday life it is very concrete. If the unconscious is the source of intuition, creativity, and inner vitality, then silence is the doorway to that source. Those who fear silence rush to fill it with reason, stories, and self-image. Those who do not fear silence allow what has not yet been named to exist, without forcing it into clarity prematurely. Modern neuroscience, though using different language from Jung, supports this intuition. When the brain is not focused on a specific task, a system known as the default mode network becomes active. This is the state in which the brain begins to connect memories, emotions, personal meaning, and inner imagery. Many studies show that deep creativity, self-reflection, and empathy do not arise when people are constantly reacting, but when they pause, allowing the mind to drift in an unstructured inner space. This explains why those who are always busy speaking, responding, and presenting themselves often feel depleted, while those who know how to pause emanate a different presence, slower but more substantial. In social interaction, respecting silence creates a subtle effect. When you do not rush to interrupt or respond immediately, you send a signal that you are not driven by the fear of being overlooked. A pause before speaking, a steady gaze while listening, or a natural silence between topics all create a sense of safety. The other person feels no pressure to perform because you are not forcing them into your rhythm. And it is precisely this feeling of being allowed to be that makes people want to stay longer. Practically speaking, respecting silence is not about learning to speak less, but about learning not to panic when silence appears. You can begin with very small situations. In a conversation, when a natural pause arises, try not to fill it immediately. Observe the restlessness that surfaces within you, the urge to speak in order to maintain presence. Simply notice that feeling without acting on it. Gradually, you will realize that silence does not erase you, nor does it make you less important. On the contrary, what you say afterward becomes clearer, more concise, and more weighty. Another important lesson is distinguishing silence from repression. Jungian silence is not swallowing emotions or avoiding truth. It is the capacity to stay with inner experience without immediately explaining or reacting. When you feel sad, you allow sadness to be there without turning it into a narrative. When you feel uncertain, you allow uncertainty to exist without rushing toward an answer. This ability to tolerate the not yet clear creates psychological depth. Those who do not fear the unclear do not fear depth, and those who do not fear depth do not make others uneasy. Silent attraction is formed here, not through sharp words, but through the capacity to remain with oneself in silence. Those who do not fear silence do not need to occupy space because they are the space. They become a still point in a moving world, a center of gravity that attracts without signaling. When you learn to respect silence, you are also learning to respect your own unconscious. You do not force it to be clear, logical, or illuminated before it is ready. And this patience creates a presence that is very difficult to imitate. In a world accustomed to noise, those who know how to be silent at the right moment do not become invisible. They become deep. And that depth, as Jung recognized early on, is one of the most enduring sources of silent attraction. And what about you? If you have ever experienced a moment when silence spoke louder than words, in a conversation, a relationship, or even while alone with yourself, you may share that story in the comments. No need for long analysis or explanation. Simply describe how it felt to remain within that silence and what shifted inside you. Sometimes, writing it down and placing your experience here is itself a gentle way to continue honoring the inner space you have just touched. Have you ever wondered what happens when you no longer feel the need to fill every gap with words or reactions? After inner independence is established and genuine humility begins to appear, people often enter a more subtle stage of attraction, the ability to respect silence. This is not silence as a tactic, nor an attitude of withdrawal or avoidance, but a form of inner stillness that has found its footing. Such a person does not panic when not speaking, does not grow restless when a conversation slows, and does not feel they are losing presence simply because they are not constantly responding. In a society where speed, quick reactions, and constant visibility are seen as markers of value, the ability to remain at ease within silence becomes a rare quality and therefore deeply attractive. Silence, in a Jungian sense, is never empty. It only appears empty to an ego that has not learned to face itself. When sound fades and external feedback disappears, those still dependent on social reflection immediately feel anxious. They speak more, explain more, laugh more, as a way to reassure themselves that they still exist in others' eyes. But for someone who has an inner axis, silence is familiar territory. There, they do not need to perform, defend, or maintain an image. They simply are. And it is precisely this unfiltered presence that creates depth. In Eastern literature, there is a story in Zhuangzi that closely mirrors this state. Zhuangzi tells of a woodworker whose creations were said to possess a special spirit. When asked why, he replied that before beginning his work, he spent several days simply sitting, not thinking about reputation, profit, or others' opinions. When all notions of self and other had settled, his hands knew what to do. This story is not about craftsmanship, but about a psychological state. Only when the mind is sufficiently still can action carry life. The woodworker is not captivating because he tries to create something special, but because he does not allow inner disturbances to interfere with his presence. Silence here is not absence, but the condition for essence to emerge. Carl Jung approached this from a deeper psychological angle. He believed that the unconscious does not communicate in the noisy language of rationality. It does not argue, explain, or persuade. It expresses itself through images, sensations, and intuitions, and can often only be perceived when consciousness steps back. When a person cannot tolerate silence, they also cannot access their unconscious, because consciousness constantly occupies all the space. Jung emphasized that many psychological disturbances do not arise from unconscious content itself, but from the fact that people do not allow the unconscious any room to speak. He wrote, "The unconscious is not just evil by nature, it is also the source of the highest good." This statement is often understood abstractly, but in everyday life it is very concrete. If the unconscious is the source of intuition, creativity, and inner vitality, then silence is the doorway to that source. Those who fear silence rush to fill it with reason, stories, and self-image. Those who do not fear silence allow what has not yet been named to exist without forcing it into clarity prematurely. Modern neuroscience, though using a different language from Jung, supports this intuition. When the brain is not focused on a specific task, a system known as the default mode network becomes active. This is the state in which the brain begins to connect memories, emotions, personal meaning, and inner imagery. Many studies show that deep creativity, self-reflection, and empathy do not arise when people are constantly reacting, but when they pause, allowing the mind to drift in an unstructured inner space. This explains why those who are always busy speaking, responding, and presenting themselves often feel depleted, while those who know how to pause emanate a different presence, slower but more substantial. In social interaction, respecting silence creates a subtle effect. When you do not rush to interrupt or respond immediately, you send a signal that you are not driven by the fear of being overlooked. A pause before speaking, a steady gaze while listening, or a natural silence between topics all create a sense of safety. The other person feels no pressure to perform because you are not forcing them into your rhythm. And it is precisely this feeling of being allowed to be that makes people want to stay longer. Practically speaking, respecting silence is not about learning to speak less, but about learning not to panic when silence appears. You can begin with very small situations. In a conversation, when a natural pause arises, try not to fill it immediately. Observe the restlessness that surfaces within you, the urge to speak in order to maintain presence. Simply notice that feeling without acting on it. Gradually, you will realize that silence does not erase you, nor does it make you less important. On the contrary, what you say afterward becomes clearer, more concise, and more weighty. Another important lesson is distinguishing silence from repression. Jungian silence is not swallowing emotions or avoiding truth. It is the capacity to stay with inner experience without immediately explaining or reacting. When you feel sad, you allow sadness to be there without turning it into a narrative. When you feel uncertain, you allow uncertainty to exist without rushing toward an answer. This ability to tolerate the not yet clear creates psychological depth. Those who do not fear the unclear do not fear depth, and those who do not fear depth do not make others uneasy. Silent attraction is formed here, not through sharp words, but through the capacity to remain with oneself in silence. Those who do not fear silence do not need to occupy space because they are the space. They become a still point in a moving world, a center of gravity that attracts without signaling. When you learn to respect silence, you are also learning to respect your own unconscious. You do not force it to be clear, logical, or illuminated before it is ready. And this patience creates a presence that is very difficult to imitate. In a world accustomed to noise, those who know how to be silent at the right moment do not become invisible, they become deep. And that depth, as Jung recognized early on, is one of the most enduring sources of silent attraction. And what about you? If you have ever experienced a moment when silence spoke louder than words, in a conversation, a relationship, or even while alone with yourself, you may share that story in the comments. No need for long analysis or explanation. Simply describe how it felt to remain within that silence and what shifted inside you. Sometimes, writing it down and placing your experience here is itself a gentle way to continue honoring the inner space you have just touched. Number 4. Shadow. The rejected part that determines attraction. After people learn how to stand firmly in inner independence, let go of the need to display themselves, and no longer panic in the face of silence, they often believe they have reached a certain level of maturity. And to some extent that is true. But Carl Jung argued that if the journey stops here, all the qualities that have just been achieved can still be very fragile. Because behind that calmness, humility, and silence, there remains a decisive factor: the shadow, the rejected part within oneself. This is the hinge of the entire psychological process, the place where silent attraction either becomes authentic or collapses into a refined performance. In Jungian psychology, the shadow is not evil in a moral sense. It is the collection of traits, impulses, emotions, desires, and reactions that the conscious ego does not want to acknowledge as its own. Whatever does not fit the self-image, social norms, or the persona one is maintaining is pushed into the darkness. The shadow, therefore, does not disappear. It merely retreats from the light of consciousness. And what is crucial is this: repressed energy never remains still. It always finds a way to leak out through the eyes, the tone of voice, behavior, unconscious reactions, and the atmosphere one carries. Jung saw the shadow as everything the conscious ego refuses to recognize as part of itself, the aspects one does not want to see, admit, or identify with the self-image being constructed. This means not only aggressive or selfish impulses, but also weakness, envy, the craving for recognition, the need for control, or even excessive sensitivity can belong to the shadow if the ego does not allow them to exist within its self-image. And precisely because the shadow is not acknowledged, it often operates behind the scenes, directing a person in ways they are not consciously aware of. Imagine a room that is carefully lit, with every piece of furniture neatly arranged to create a pleasant impression. But behind a closed door, there is a powerful source of heat being trapped. The tighter the door is locked, the greater the pressure behind it becomes. Eventually, the heat escapes, not in the form of light, but as leakage, warmth, a burning smell, or a sudden explosion. The shadow functions in the same way. It does not disrupt through obvious presence, but through subtle leaks that distort attraction. This is why Jung argued that much of what people call attraction is in fact a persona covering the shadow. A person may appear very polite, calm, and humble on the surface, but if their shadow is filled with the need to be admired, to control, or to feel superior, that energy will leak out through the way they look at others, through irritation when they are not given attention, or through passive-aggressive reactions that are difficult to name. The other person may not articulate it, but they sense that something is off, something feels unsafe. This is false attraction, aesthetically pleasing on the surface, but exhausting with prolonged contact. By contrast, genuine attraction does not come from the disappearance of the shadow. Jung emphasized that the shadow cannot be eliminated and should not be destroyed. True attraction appears when the shadow is seen, acknowledged, but no longer in control. When a person is honest enough to quietly say to themselves, "This part is also me," the energy that was once repressed begins to be released in a healthy way. And when that energy no longer needs to leak out, presence becomes lighter, more authentic and deeper. I once heard the story of a woman who was consistently described as very pleasant. She spoke gently, always listened, and rarely expressed anger or dissatisfaction. People felt comfortable around her, yet at the same time had a vague sense that they never truly reached her. In close relationships, small conflicts often accumulated and then erupted in confusing ways. In therapy, she realized that her shadow was full of anger and a need to be prioritized, aspects she did not allow herself to acknowledge because she feared being seen as selfish. That anger did not disappear through denial. It merely leaked out through emotional coldness, prolonged silence, and unspoken distance. When she began to allow herself to see and name that anger, neither acting it out nor denying it, a very clear change occurred. She became less pleasant on the surface, but far more trustworthy and attractive at depth. Others felt they were meeting a real person, not a refined performance. Jung famously wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." In the context of attraction, this means that you do not become more attractive by only polishing your beautiful qualities, but by daring to face the unattractive, inconvenient, and socially uncomfortable parts within yourself. An unrecognized shadow makes all previous qualities prone to becoming performance. Silence can turn into repression. Humility can become a disguise for a sense of superiority. Inner independence can turn into cold detachment. But when the shadow is seen, these qualities return to their rightful place. Silence becomes genuine space. Humility becomes grounded strength without defense. Independence becomes freedom rather than withdrawal. What matters is that working with the shadow does not mean acting it out. Jung was very clear on this point. Recognition does not equal indulgence. Seeing anger does not mean unloading it onto others. Recognizing the need for control does not mean letting it dictate behavior. On the contrary, only when the shadow is made conscious does the ego gain real choice. When it is unconscious, the shadow controls you. When it is conscious, you can contain it without being ruled by it. In social life, those who have worked with their shadow often radiate a very particular kind of attraction. They do not try to appear good, nor do they try to appear strong. They have clear boundaries, can say no without guilt, and can acknowledge envy, fear, or vulnerability without collapsing. Around them, others feel safe because there is no hidden leakage, no sense that something is being concealed. This wholeness creates the most sustainable form of attraction. The shadow, therefore, is not an obstacle to attraction, but a doorway. When that door is locked, everything in front of it remains surface level. When that door is opened, not to display, but to be seen, the entire inner system begins to function more coherently. And when a person no longer has to expend energy hiding from themselves, they become lighter, more real, and naturally present. This is why Jung regarded confronting the shadow as an indispensable step in the process of individuation. Without a conscious shadow, there is no whole self. And without a whole self, all attraction is merely technique. The shadow is the hinge because it determines whether you are living or performing a carefully edited version of yourself. When the shadow remains in darkness, the world senses that split. When the shadow is brought into conscious awareness, not allowed to dominate, but not banished either, attraction no longer needs to be manufactured. It naturally emerges, like a person who no longer has to shield themselves from who they are. Number 5. Holding values. Steady in adversity. If you have seen your shadow, adversity becomes the moment that tests whether you truly have mastery over it. There is a truth Jung saw very clearly. No one truly knows who they are when everything is going well. When life flows smoothly, people have enough space to maintain an image, uphold principles, and believe they are fine. But when crisis strikes, when pressure mounts, when loss, betrayal, failure, or sudden collapse occurs, the entire external structure immediately begins to shake. It is precisely then that essence is revealed. Not the essence you want to believe about yourself, but the essence that is actually operating when there is no time for prolonged reflection. Holding values steady in adversity is not a moral ideal, but a psychological capacity. Jung believed that crisis always activates deeply buried layers. Those who have never made the shadow conscious often react quickly, intensely, and instinctively. They say things they later cannot believe they were capable of saying. They act on emotion and only afterwards seek justification, not because they are bad, but because in that moment the ego is pushed aside and control falls into the hands of impulses that have not been integrated. By contrast, those who have worked with their shadow do not become more noble in crisis, but slower. This slowness is not hesitation or weakness, but familiarity with recognizing. This emotion is arising, but it is not an adesh. It is this inner delay that makes the difference. When others react to release pressure, they react to preserve values. And in adversity, that becomes a very rare form of attraction. A frequently cited story in modern history is Viktor Frankl's conduct in Nazi concentration camps. Stripped of freedom, identity, and dignity, facing death daily, Frankl had no external conditions left to maintain an image. Yet in those extreme circumstances, he realized that the last thing no one could take away was one's inner attitude towards circumstances. Frankl observed clearly that some people lost everything yet retained their character, while others lost their character even before losing their lives. What earned Frankl deep respect from those around him was not physical strength or inspiring speeches, but a calm refusal to compromise with the cruelty of circumstance. He did not allow fear, resentment, or despair to dictate how he treated others. That steadiness created a quiet moral attraction, allowing people to believe that there was still a value axis to hold on to, even in hell. Jung once wrote, "In the last analysis, the essential thing is the life of the individual." In the context of adversity, this statement carries a very concrete meaning. It is not circumstances that determine who you are, but how you live within them. Holding values does not mean being fearless, painless, or unshaken. It means you do not allow those states to determine your core actions. You may tremble, but you do not betray yourself. You may feel anger, but you do not break boundaries you know to be right. In everyday life, this appears clearly in small but sharp situations. When misunderstood, some rush to justify themselves, attack, or reopen the past to defend their image. Others choose silence, not out of fear, but because they know that a heated reaction would allow their shadow to take control. When treated unfairly, some retaliate immediately to reclaim a sense of power. Others remain composed, not out of submission, but because they refuse to let circumstances pull them away from the value system they have chosen to live by. The latter are rarely loud, but they leave a very deep impression, not because they are right, but because they are not bent by circumstance. Holding values in adversity is also where the line between genuine and false attraction becomes clearest. False attraction often collapses quickly under pressure. The person who always appears pleasant may become bitter. The one who always appears strong may become controlling. The one who always appears calm may suddenly explode. Not because they were deliberately deceptive, but because unintegrated parts have taken over. By contrast, those accustomed to seeing their shadow do not change personality in crisis. They remain themselves, only more clearly defined. And that consistency creates a powerful sense of trust. Importantly, Jung did not view this ability as innate. He saw it as the result of a long process in which people learn to observe themselves in uncomfortable moments rather than fleeing or blaming. Each time you do not react immediately when triggered, each time you acknowledge emotion without acting it out, you are training the capacity to hold values. When a major crisis arrives, you do not need to try to stand firm. You simply do what you have already practiced. The attraction of someone who remains steady when everything collapses does not lie in outward composure, but in the sense of safety they bring to others. Around them, one does not fear being pulled into emotional chaos. There is a sense of anchoring, even if no one articulates it. In a world where people easily panic, react, and lose control, the presence of someone not governed by shadow-driven emotions becomes exceedingly rare. And rarity is naturally attractive. Holding values in adversity is also the deepest stage of silent attraction. It is no longer the attraction of demeanor, silence, or surface humility, but the attraction of character. When all protective layers are stripped away, you remain yourself. Jung believed that only then does a person truly live from the self, rather than being driven by unconscious forces. In the process of individuation, this is the stage where the ego no longer merely understands the shadow intellectually, but has learned to live with it in reality, not letting it dominate, not denying its existence, and not using it as an excuse for justification. From this balance, a very enduring form of attraction emerges. It does not need promotion or affirmation, but it is recognized very quickly in the hardest moments. Holding values in adversity does not make you perfect. It makes you trustworthy. And in a world where trust is the most fragile thing, that trustworthiness is the most powerful form of silent attraction Jung ever pointed to, even if he rarely used the word attractive. Number 6. Trustworthy, the attraction of stability. And when a person can hold their values even in adversity, not allowing the shadow to pull them into impulsive reactions or self-betrayal, a very natural consequence appears. They become someone others can trust. This trustworthiness is not built on promises or momentary images, but on the sense of stability others feel when they are with you, even as circumstances constantly shift. From a Jungian perspective, this is not an isolated moral trait, but the direct result of an integrated personality, where the different parts of the psyche are no longer silently in conflict or pulling in opposing directions. Attraction is often misunderstood as something that happens very quickly. A glance, a sentence, an initial moment of connection can create a strong impression. But Jung would ask a deeper question: what happens afterward? When time passes, when novelty fades, when people encounter you across many different contexts, does the sense of safety and consistency remain? It is precisely here that trustworthiness becomes the dividing line between fleeting attraction and attraction with depth. In Jungian psychology, an integrated personality does not mean perfection or the absence of inner contradiction. Integration means that conscious and unconscious parts, values, emotions, impulses, and personal limits have been recognized and organized into a relatively unified structure. When this structure is stable, external behavior no longer shifts erratically with mood or circumstance. One does not need to become a different version each day to adapt. That consistency creates trust, and trust itself is a very quiet form of attraction. Imagine an old pendulum clock. It does not move quickly, nor does it draw attention. Yet its motion is steady and precise, day after day. In a room full of chaotic sounds and movements, that consistent rhythm creates a sense of order. You do not need to stare at it, but you feel reassured knowing it is there, still functioning as it should. A trustworthy person creates a similar effect. They do not need to display attraction, but their presence reduces anxiety, because others know that who you are today is who you were yesterday, and likely who you will be tomorrow. In everyday life, this kind of attraction is visible in very small things. It is the person who calls when they say they will. Not always perfectly on time, but always with notice. It is the person who maintains the same respectful attitude, whether they are relaxed or under stress. It is the person who does not suddenly disappear and then reappear with dramatic explanations. These behaviors do not create strong impressions in a single meeting, but over time, they accumulate into trust. And when trust forms, attraction no longer requires effort. I once heard the story of a man named Lucas working in the arts, whom the public often described as very ordinary in person. He had no glamorous appearance, no overwhelming initial presence, but those who had worked with him for years spoke of something else: stability. Whether facing success or failure, praise or criticism, the way Lucas treated others hardly changed. He kept his word, did not blame others when problems arose, and did not allow temporary emotions to dictate long-term decisions. In a field full of volatility and large egos, this consistency made people want to collaborate with him long-term. Lucas's attraction did not lie in spotlight charisma, but in the sense that others could rely on him without caution. Carl Jung once wrote, "You are what you do, not what you say you will do. What you repeatedly do reflects the degree of integration within you. Words can be adjusted to circumstances, but repeated behavior rarely lies. When words and actions frequently diverge, it is a sign of inner fracture. And that fracture, however subtle, is always sensed by others." Trustworthiness does not mean rigidity or an inability to change. On the contrary, those with integrated personalities can still adapt, remain flexible, and learn. The difference lies here. Their change has inner logic rather than impulsive reaction. Today they are not kind, and tomorrow cold simply due to mood. When change occurs, they can usually explain it, take responsibility, and stay in contact. This creates a deep sense of safety, because others do not have to constantly guess which version of you they are encountering. In relationships, this stability becomes an anchor. When the external world is full of uncertainty, people unconsciously gravitate toward those who do not drain them with constant vigilance. A trustworthy person does not keep others on edge. They do not create continuous emotional highs, but they also do not leave anxious voids. Around them, others can exhale because they do not have to prepare for sudden reversals. From a Jungian perspective, this can only occur when the psyche is not fragmented. When rejected parts, unacknowledged impulses, or deep internal conflicts are still competing for control, external behavior becomes difficult to stabilize. One day you are principled, the next you break your own principle. One moment you are sincere, the next you withdraw without explanation. Others do not need psychological knowledge to sense this. Prolonged contact is enough. The attraction of trustworthiness is therefore very different from the attraction of intense emotion. It does not make hearts race immediately, but it makes people want to stay. It does not create drama, but it creates endurance. And in the modern world, where people are exhausted by inconsistency, endurance becomes a rare form of appeal. Keeping one's word, remaining consistent in behavior, reacting slowly rather than impulsively, these are not social techniques, but signs that you have reached a certain level of harmony within yourself. When there is no longer an internal war, you no longer need to constantly adjust externally for protection. Others trust you not because you persuade them, but because they sense continuity in how you show up. Trustworthiness, ultimately, is not something you do for others, but a state you live in. When personality is integrated, stable behavior becomes a natural consequence without strain. And within that stability, silent attraction continues to strengthen, not loudly, not ostentatiously, but firmly enough to remain standing as everything else changes. So we have passed more than half of the journey, and I want to thank you for staying until here, quietly yet fully. Before continuing, take a brief moment to pause, breathe slowly, and sense what your inner rhythm feels like right now. If what you have just heard resonated with you, if you recognize the value of stability and of living consistently with yourself, then tap like on this video as a small sign of inner agreement. Sometimes, a very simple action is enough to affirm to yourself, "This matters to me." And perhaps that like will also help this video reach someone else who needs the sense of safety and steadiness we have just spoken about. Number 7. Caring for yourself as a ritual of respect. There is something very natural that emerges when a personality has become sufficiently grounded and is no longer pulled apart by inner conflict. The way you care for yourself is no longer an emotional reaction or a form of indulgence, but becomes a ritual of respect toward your own life. It is no longer a forceful attempt to be better, nor a way of soothing yourself to escape, but a form of care rooted in dignity. In this context, self-care is no longer a fashionable concept or a kind of self-reward, but a quiet ritual that affirms your own worth. And it is precisely here that a very particular kind of attraction is formed, unloud, unperformed, yet radiating a sense of inner sufficiency. In modern life, self-care is often misunderstood in two extremes. One is self-neglect in the name of discipline, where people constantly push past their physiological and emotional limits to prove their strength. The other is self-indulgence under the banner of loving yourself, where every discomfort is immediately soothed through consumption, pleasure, or avoidance. Jung did not side with either extreme. He saw the human being as a psychosomatic whole, where body, emotion, and inner life cannot be separated without psychological consequences. In Jungian psychology, the concept of the psyche does not refer only to the mind in an intellectual sense, but to the entire inner life of a human being, inseparably bound to the living body. This means that how you sleep, eat, breathe, move, and rest is not merely a health issue, but a reflection of how you are treating the self, the regulating center of your entire being. When the body is treated as a tool to serve the ego's goals, sooner or later the psyche pushes back through exhaustion, emptiness, or emotional disturbance. And these states, no matter how carefully you try to hide them, inevitably leak outward as unstable energy. A person who practices self-care in the Jungian sense is not someone obsessed with themselves, but someone who knows how to listen to subtle signals before they turn into crisis. They do not wait until total exhaustion to allow themselves to stop. They do not need to justify rest with achievements already earned. Their regular eating, sufficient sleep, and stable daily rhythm are not about looking better to others, but about regarding their body as an inseparable part of their self-worth. This attitude sends a very clear signal. I am not living in deprivation, and I do not treat myself as something that can be sacrificed unconditionally. A friend of mine, Clara, is not someone who stands out in a crowd, nor does she live a lifestyle that makes others marvel. Yet being around her always feels inexplicably comfortable. Clara has very simple habits. She eats regularly, never skips meals even when busy, comes home early enough to sleep on time, and rarely lets herself fall into prolonged exhaustion. When stressed, she neither dumps it onto others nor pretends nothing is wrong, but actively adjusts her rhythm of life. No one calls these things impressive, but over time, people begin to trust Clara. They sense that she does not carry inner chaos, that she does not unconsciously demand compensation from her surroundings. And it is precisely this sense of sufficiency that creates a very durable form of attraction. From the perspective of modern science, this is not vague at all. Research on the nervous system shows that physiological stability directly affects emotional regulation. When the body is chronically sleep-deprived, irregularly nourished, or kept in prolonged stress, the sympathetic nervous system remains constantly activated, making a person more reactive, irritable, and less capable of calm presence. Conversely, a stable biological rhythm allows the parasympathetic nervous system to function more effectively, creating a state of inner safety. And this state of safety is the physiological foundation of silent attraction. Others sense that around you, they do not need to be on guard. Jung, though he did not use the language of modern neuroscience, perceived this connection very early. He believed that a healthy psyche is always linked to respect for the body's natural rhythms. When people neglect basic needs, they not only damage their health, but also weaken their inner axis. An ego that constantly forces the body easily falls into moral arrogance or shadow eruptions. An ego that constantly indulges itself loses the capacity to endure. Both create imbalance that others can sense very quickly. Jung once said, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases." Self-care, therefore, is not about following a universal formula, but about the ability to listen and adjust to one's own unique structure. Those who truly care for themselves do not boast about their habits, nor do they use them to judge others. They quietly maintain a rhythm that allows them to be fully present. The attraction born from self-care does not come from the image of "I love myself," but from the physiological and emotional stability it creates. When you are not starving, not exhausted, not excessively burdened by suppressed emotions, you are less driven to seek compensation from the outside. You do not need others to constantly soothe you. You do not unconsciously demand attention, validation, or rescue. And it is precisely this lack of need that creates a form of freedom that makes others feel lighter in your presence. More importantly, self-care in the Jungian sense is not a selfish inward turn. On the contrary, it increases your capacity to be present with others. When your body and emotions are stable, you listen better, respond more slowly, and react less defensively. Others sense that they are not carrying your unresolved turmoil. And in a world full of exhausted people, simply not becoming an unconscious burden is already a powerful form of attraction. Self-care, when properly understood, is a ritual of respect. You respect your limits, respect your rhythm, and through that, respect the life moving within you. Jung would say this is the self being listened to, not the ego being indulged. When the self is respected, the entire inner system becomes more harmonious. And from that harmony, attraction does not need to be manufactured. It arises naturally, like someone living in sufficiency, without needing to prove, without needing to display, yet making others feel safe when near. Number 8. Compassion, the ability to enter another's world. When a person has learned to stand firmly within themselves, no longer pulled off balance by unconscious impulses or the need to protect an image, a very subtle capacity begins to form. The ability to enter another person's inner world without harming them. Jung did not call this kindness, but compassion, a deep form of presence in which you do not need to dominate, fix, or stand above in order to feel right. Compassion differs from pity at a fundamental point. Pity always places the other person lower, weaker, in need of rescue. It carries an implicit distance, even if it appears benevolent. Compassion is the opposite. It neither pulls the other down nor lifts the self up. It is the capacity to see another's pain, contradiction, or mistakes without rushing to judgment, without separating oneself from them. Compassion does not say, "I am better than you." It says quietly, "I understand that this could happen to anyone, including me." Jung believed that people easily project their unresolved parts onto others. When we have not faced our own weakness, envy, fear, or anger, we often react strongly to those qualities in others. We judge, label, or rush to advise in order to escape our own discomfort. But when the shadow has been recognized and returned to its proper place, the need to project diminishes markedly. And it is precisely then that compassion has space to arise. Imagine two people standing before a muddy river after heavy rain. The first stands on high ground, pointing and declaring that the water is dirty because someone upstream did something wrong. The second steps down to a lower bank, not letting themselves be swept away, but close enough to feel the current. The second does not need many explanations. Their presence alone creates a sense of being understood. Compassion is like choosing to stand on that lower bank, not dissolving, not drowning, but close enough to connect. In everyday life, this difference becomes very clear in difficult conversations. Some people, when hearing about another's mistake or pain, immediately offer advice, analysis, or comparison. "At least you're better off than I was." These reactions often arise from inner insecurity, from the need to quickly restore order so as not to face vulnerability. By contrast, compassionate people do something much simpler. They listen without interrupting. They do not rush to classify everything as right or wrong. They allow the story to exist in its own shape. And strangely, it is precisely this doing nothing extra that creates the deepest impact. I once witnessed a very ordinary situation that illustrated this clearly. In a group work session, a younger member made a serious mistake that delayed the entire project. The atmosphere grew tense, everyone anticipating blame. The team leader, instead of analyzing the error immediately, calmly asked one question: "What made you hesitate to speak up sooner?" That question did not accuse, nor did it excuse. It opened space for the person to speak about fear of judgment and feeling not good enough. After the meeting, no one remembered the technical details of the mistake, but everyone remembered the sense of safety the leader created. That was not weakness, That was compassion. And it generated deeper trust than any disciplinary speech could. Jung once wrote a very short sentence that contains this entire spirit. Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of other people. When you are honest enough with your own darkness, you are no longer shocked by encountering it in others. You do not need to deny it, fix it immediately, or step into the role of judge. That lack of defensiveness is what makes others feel seen without being judged. Compassion, therefore, is not a spontaneous emotion, but a stable psychological state. It requires inner strength, not excessive sensitivity. Those who have not reconciled with their shadow are easily swept up by others' emotions, or else must erect cold barriers to protect themselves. Compassionate people are different. They can enter another's world while keeping their inner axis intact. They are not fused, not carried away, but neither are they standing outside. In close relationships, this is what creates the most enduring bond. When you know you can reveal your imperfect parts without being criticized or fixed, trust begins to form. Compassion builds trust, not through promises, but through repeated experience. The experience of being listened to without being diminished. And once this trust is established, attraction ceases to be superficial. It becomes a deep pull that draws people back, inviting them to open a little more. Importantly, compassion does not erase boundaries. Jung did not advocate dissolving into others' pain. On the contrary, only when you have clear boundaries does compassion avoid becoming a burden. You can understand without carrying. You can be present without rescuing. This distinction is subtle and emerges only when you no longer need others to be okay for you to feel safe. In modern society, where people are accustomed to reacting quickly, judging quickly, and labeling quickly, compassion becomes a rare form of presence. It is not loud, it does not impress immediately, but it leaves a lasting mark. People may forget what you said, but they rarely forget the feeling of being understood that you created. And it is precisely this feeling that forms the deepest kind of silent attraction. When the shadow has been reined in, you no longer need to win every conversation. You do not need to prove yourself right, nor others wrong. You can allow human complexity to exist. And when you allow that, others feel a rare freedom. The freedom to be themselves, even if incomplete. Compassion, therefore, is not a social skill that can be learned quickly. It is the natural result of a long inner journey, one in which you have had the courage to look at the most uncomfortable parts of yourself without running away. When you can do that with yourself, you no longer have reason to be harsh with others. And at that point, you become someone others are not only drawn to, but want to remain with. In the Jungian process, this is the stage where silent attraction reaches its deepest human dimension. It is no longer about demeanor, nor about behavioral stability, but about the ability to touch the real person in another without violating them. Compassion does not make you stand out in a crowd, but it makes you irreplaceable in the inner world of those who have truly been seen by you. Number 9. Joy and laughter. Liberated energy. The joy Jung speaks of is not surface-level excitement, not loud laughter meant to attract attention, nor a positive attitude learned as a social skill. It is the joy of energy that is no longer repressed. When the shadow has been seen, when previously split parts have been reconciled, The energy once used to restrain, conceal, and defend is released. And when energy is released, it does not necessarily explode. It often appears as lightness, flexibility, and a very genuine laugh. In Jungian psychology, joy is not considered a goal, but a sign. It indicates that the psyche is no longer stuck in latent conflict. When a person is still imprisoned by the shadow, laughter often carries a different tone: sarcasm, mockery, strain, or excessive loudness. That is the laughter of tension briefly discharged. By contrast, the laughter of someone who has liberated their inner life is calmer, clearer, and capable of soothing the surrounding space. It does not make others feel scrutinized, but allows them to relax. There is a story in the Bible that is rarely viewed through a psychological lens, yet subtly reflects this distinction. The story of Sarah, Abraham's elderly wife. When she first hears the prophecy that she will bear a child at an advanced age, her immediate reaction is laughter, not joyful laughter, but laughter of disbelief, bitterness, and helplessness, the laughter of an inner life long accustomed to disappointment. Later, when the child is actually born, Sarah laughs again, but this time the laughter carries an entirely different meaning. She says that God has made her laugh, and that everyone who hears of it will laugh with her. The two laughs appear similar outwardly, but their energy is completely different. One arises from long repression, the other from release. Jung was particularly attentive to this difference. The same behavior, arising from two different inner structures, produces two entirely different effects. Liberated joy does not try to make anyone happy. It is simply the natural result of an inner life no longer locked down. When a person no longer expends energy hiding anger, fear, envy, or the need for control, emotional flexibility emerges. They can laugh at their own clumsiness, at life's paradoxes, at imperfection. Laughter then is no longer a weapon, but a sign of freedom. This joy resembles a stream that has finally been cleared after long being blocked by rocks. When obstructed, the water churns violently, becomes murky, and easily overflows. When the channel opens, the water does not grow louder. It becomes clearer and cooler. It does not need to prove its force. It simply flows. A person who carries liberated joy is the same. They do not try to spread positive energy, yet their presence slows and lightens the surrounding rhythm, as if everything is allowed to return to its natural pace. Jung once wrote, "Where wisdom reigns, there is no conflict between thinking and feeling. When thought and emotion no longer oppose each other, joy appears as a consequence, not the joy of victory, but the joy of harmony." A person no longer needs to force themselves to feel right, good, or noble. They allow themselves to be human, with limits, paradoxes, and vulnerability. And it is precisely this permission that opens space for genuine laughter. In social life, this kind of joy has a very particular attraction. It does not demand a response. You are not forced to laugh along, nor placed in a position where you must react. Yet very naturally, you find yourself more relaxed in their presence. They do not bring tension that needs solving, nor gloom that needs rescuing. They appear as a steady, gentle energy that allows things to be as they are. Jung believed that when psychological energy is repressed in the shadow, it seeks an outlet, often as tension, irritability, or toxic humor. But when the shadow is reintegrated, no longer denied, that energy becomes clearer. Joy, then, is not a reaction, but a baseline state. It does not need a specific reason, because it does not arise from circumstances, but from inner flow. Importantly, liberated joy does not deny suffering. Those who carry this laughter are not those who have never been hurt, but often those who have passed through pain without becoming bitter. They can speak of difficulty without making it central. They can laugh even when life is imperfect, because they no longer need life to be perfect in order to live. In relationships, this energy creates a rare form of attraction. Others feel they can drop their shoulders, lower defenses, and allow themselves to stop performing. Not because the other person sets the mood, but because their presence demands nothing. They do not need you to be happy, nor need you to be sad. And it is precisely this lack of demand that creates shared joy. Joy and laughter, from a Jungian perspective, are not things to be practiced, but things that appear when inner layers are freed. You cannot sustainably force yourself to be cheerful if you remain internally locked. But when you dare to look at your own darkness, to endure the truth about yourself, and no longer spend energy shielding yourself, joy arrives on its own. It does not need to be named. It is simply there. And for this reason, those who carry this energy become silently attractive, not because they make others laugh, but because they allow others to breathe. In a world full of pressure, laughter no longer imprisoned in the shadow becomes a rare form of light, not dazzling, not ostentatious, but sufficient to soften every space it touches. Perhaps this is why Jung never advised people to be happier, but urged them to become more whole. Joy is not something you pursue. It is what appears when no part of you is left behind. When you no longer strain to maintain an image, no longer expend energy fighting yourself, life naturally becomes lighter. Laughter then does not need perfect timing, charm, or response. It is simply a reflex of life flowing freely. And in a world where so many are exhausted from holding themselves together just to exist, the person who carries this liberated joy becomes a place not for entertainment, but for rest. Number 10. Elegant presence, luxury without excess. So when joy has become a baseline state and laughter is no longer a discharge of tension, what shapes your demeanor when all noise settles? That is an elegant presence, something that does not need display, yet remains clearly felt in how you speak, how you fall silent, and how you leave a space. The elegance we are speaking of does not lie in glamour, nor in expensive things. It lies in an inner state that has been regulated to the point where you no longer need external compensation. Luxury, in the Jungian sense, is first and foremost an attitude toward life, restraint, sufficiency, and inner order. An elegant person does not need to make themselves more. They only need to stop making themselves excessive. Excessive in words, reactions, explanations, or efforts to be recognized. When unconscious conflict persists, the body and demeanor tense up defensively. You may dress well and speak skillfully, yet still radiate urgency, strain, and subtle demand. When inner warfare subsides, you naturally walk a little slower, speak one sentence less, and it is precisely that measured space that creates presence. Jung did not see demeanor as ornamentation, but as an expression of psychic structure. When inner parts are not integrated, you must expend energy to hold yourself, hold face, image, role, control. And that holding energy leaks through small details, eyes darting when judged, a stiff smile when unsure of being liked, a voice unconsciously rising in argument, impatience when silence appears. Elegance begins when you no longer need to hold so much, not because you give up, but because you are grounded enough not to be shaken by minor stimuli. There is a clear metaphor for this. A finely tempered sword does not need to be wildly swung to prove its sharpness. It rests in its sheath, silent, yet others sense its rightness. An elegant person is the same. They do not radiate luxury through display, but through restraint. They appear as a simple straight line, no bending to please, no straining to dominate. And because they do not strain, their presence leaves an aftertaste, not of drama, but of clarity. In everyday life, this restraint shows up in three places: speech, gesture, and reaction. Elegant speech knows when to stop. It does not need to say everything, explain everything, or prove everything. A person with presence answers enough to be clear, not extra to be liked. Elegant gestures are unhurried, non-demanding of attention. They set a glass down softly, not throwing noise into a room. They look at others directly, without scrutinizing. Elegant reactions contain inner delay, not impulsive, not rushed to counter, not quick to defend. They can disagree without turning conversation into combat. They can be misunderstood without losing their quality. I recall a very ordinary example. At a gathering, a newcomer arrived dressed simply, without striking accessories, without pushing conversation toward themselves. As chatter grew lively and a few jokes crossed the line, the atmosphere wavered. The newcomer smiled lightly and shifted the topic with a single short sentence, without embarrassing anyone. Strangely, the group softened. Not because this person led or controlled the room, but because they did not bring an invisible need, the need to win, to dominate, to be important. At the end of the evening, no one remembered how much they spoke, but they remembered how it felt when they were there. Everything felt cleaner, calmer, more comfortable. That is the aftertaste of elegance, what remains after you leave. Jung once wrote something close to this spirit. A man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them. If you have not passed through the inferno of your inner impulses, you must wear masks to cover them, and masks always create tension. When you have passed through, seen, understood, and reconciled to some degree, you no longer need display to suppress anxiety. You do not need luxury of objects, because you possess luxury of self-command. And self-command is what creates demeanor most quietly, most swiftly. Luxury does not require excess, because it is not something you buy. It is the result of inner-outer harmony. When your inner rhythm is right, your outer expression naturally fits. You do not need to try to be refined. You only need to live less crudely. Crudeness here does not mean rudeness, but unpolished excess, reacting too fast, speaking too much, ego showing too plainly, emotions spilling over. Elegance is a form of refinement, not to make you artificial, but to restore precision. And what is interesting is that elegant presence does not make others feel less. On the contrary, it makes them feel respected. Because an elegant person does not use refinement as a weapon to create distance. They use it to keep things clean, clean of display, clean of covert competition, clean of the need to outdo. Around them, others are not pulled into value contests. Others can breathe, as with liberated joy, but in a different tone, quieter, more mature, deeper. If you want to cultivate this presence, Jung would not tell you to learn style, but to look at where you still strain. Where do you strain to be recognized? Where do you speak too much from fear of being forgotten? Where do you react too quickly from fear of losing power? Each time you notice a point of strain without rushing to cover it, your presence becomes a little more real. And when the real stabilizes, elegance appears. It needs no advertisement. It needs only consistency. When you enter life with an inner world already regulated, no matter what you wear or how much you speak, others sense one thing. There is order in you. And order, in a world full of noise, is the most attractive form of luxury. Perhaps the most subtle quality of this presence is this: it does not seek influence, yet it influences, not through intensity, but through invisible trust. An elegant person does not leave others feeling conquered nor diminished. They leave a quiet space where others can return to themselves without defense. When demeanor reaches that level, it is no longer merely personal. It becomes a silent contribution to the environment. And in a world overloaded with disturbance, the presence that preserves order is itself a rare value. Before leaving this section, I invite you to do one very small but meaningful thing. If what you have just read touched you, if you recognize within yourself a desire to live with less strain, less excess, and closer alignment to your own rhythm, leave a single word in the comments. No explanation, no story. Just one word that feels true to the state you are moving toward right now. Sometimes, naming one word is already the first step toward inner order taking shape. Number 11. Keeping a touch of mystery. Keeping a touch of mystery, in Jung's view, is not a communication technique or an attraction strategy. It is the natural outcome of an inner life that is respected at its proper rhythm. When a person is secure enough not to prove who they are, they also feel no urge to reveal everything. Not because they have something to hide, but because they understand that the psyche does not operate on the logic of instant exposure. Some parts need time to settle, to be lived with, to mature before they enter language. And it is precisely this unhurried quality that creates depth. In Jungian psychology, the psyche is the totality of human psychological life, encompassing both conscious awareness and deeper layers operating beneath it. The psyche is not a uniform mass, but a multi-layered structure that develops over time. Jung believed that forcing everything into consciousness at once is not maturity, but a form of inner violation. He wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Consciousness does not open through hurried exposure, but through the capacity to endure one's own process. When people feel compelled to say everything, share everything, be completely honest in all situations, they are often acting from anxiety rather than maturity. Anxiety of being misunderstood, abandoned, or unseen. But real connection does not arise from revealing too fast. It arises from the ability to stay with what does not yet need to be said. Mystery, in the Jungian sense, is not concealment. Concealment is a defensive act, always accompanied by tension. Those who conceal must control words, behavior, and reactions so nothing slips. Mystery is the opposite. It requires no control because it does not oppose truth. It simply does not force truth to appear before it is stable enough. Those who keep a touch of mystery speak less, not out of fear, but out of respect for their own rhythm and for the other person's. You can see this clearly in the story of a woman in love. She is not mysterious in the sense of being cold or inaccessible. On the contrary, when with the person she loves, she is fully present, attentive, and sincere. But she does not rush to recount her entire past, nor does she pour all her emotions, pain, hopes, and future plans into the early months. When curiosity arises, she does not evade, but neither does she fling every door open. She simply smiles and says, "That's for later, when we know each other better." Strangely, this unhurried approach allows the relationship to deepen rather than cool. The man beside her does not feel excluded, but invited to walk through a process together. He does not feel he already knows everything, and thus does not lapse into boredom or complacency. Over time, as trust thickens, she shares more, but each opening arrives at the right moment, in the right measure. Love, therefore, is not burned out by emotional excess, but nourished by healthy curiosity and the sense that an inner world is alive, growing, and waiting to be explored together. There is a clear metaphor for this: a carefully tended garden. Not all flowers bloom at the same time. Some plants require several seasons before flowering, and if you force the bud open just to show it, you will never see its true beauty. A person with depth is like that garden. They are not closed, but they do not open all gates at once. You enter and see enough to be curious, enough to trust, and enough to want to return. This sense of not yet complete sustains attachment far better than any flood of disclosure. When people have not accepted themselves, they often swing between two extremes: excessive concealment or excessive exposure. Concealment avoids being seen. Exposure seeks reassurance. Both arise from insecurity. Those who have accepted themselves to some degree need neither. They are not afraid of being misunderstood, but they do not need to be understood immediately. And this non-dependence creates the quality of mystery. In modern life, where social media and sharing culture encourage constant disclosure, the ability to leave some things unsaid becomes a rare form of attraction. Not because it is unusual, but because it introduces slowness into a world that moves too fast. When you do not tell everything at once, you send a subtle signal. I do not need to use my story to buy attention. This signal is often sensed unconsciously as a sign of depth and self-command. Depth is always more attractive than absolute clarity, because absolute clarity often signals closure. When everything has been fully revealed, there is no space left for discovery. The unknown, by contrast, does not create cold distance, but living curiosity, a desire to understand gradually, to walk alongside, to witness unfolding over time. Jung viewed individuation as a long path that cannot be shortened by words. And if you yourself are still on that path, why force others to see all of you from the beginning? Keeping a touch of mystery also protects relationships from rapid emotional consumption. When people expose their entire inner life in a short time, relationships often peak quickly and then fall into emptiness. With gradual opening, relationships are given time to grow alongside understanding. This is not a game of withholding, but respect for the natural rhythm of intimacy. In communication, this appears subtly. Those who retain mystery do not speak to fill silence. They do not feel compelled to explain every reaction or emotion. They allow space, and that space gives their words greater weight. When they do share, others listen, because what is spoken has been chosen. This selectivity does not diminish authenticity, it deepens it. Mystery also does not mean distance. On the contrary, it often accompanies genuine presence. Those who keep mystery tend to be fully present in the moment, listening deeply, responding just enough. They do not use personal information to create connection. They use attention. And this attention is often felt by others as a rare form of closeness. From a Jungian core perspective, not forcing premature disclosure is an act of respect toward the self. The self, in Jungian psychology, is the regulating center of the entire psyche, beyond the conscious ego. When you allow the self to guide you, you know when to speak, when to be silent, when to open, and when to hold back. You do not decide this through strategy, but through inner sensing. And when you live by that rhythm, others feel the rightness of your presence, even if they cannot name it. Ultimately, keeping a touch of mystery is not about making others curious about you, but about not betraying your own process. Not every experience needs to be shared. Not every thought needs to be spoken. Some things simply need to be lived. And when you allow yourself to live fully without proving, silent attraction naturally appears. Not loud, not performative, but deep enough that others sense there is always a dimension in you that has not been exhausted. And it is precisely that dimension that makes them want to stay, not to uncover everything, but to walk alongside. Number 12. Cultural intelligence, depth that is not copied. So when a person has learned to preserve a sense of mystery, not rushing to expose what has not yet matured, what shows that this depth is truly being lived rather than merely kept silent? It is the moment when their knowledge begins to carry weight, not because they know more, but because what they know has passed through life. In Jung's view, knowledge in itself does not make a person profound. Someone can read extensively, speak eloquently, quote accurately, and yet still feel hollow after prolonged contact. This is because such knowledge has not yet been digested. It remains on the surface level of consciousness, has not passed through the unconscious, has not touched lived experience, has not collided with suffering, failure, conflict, and personal limitation. When knowledge has not been lived, it resembles a borrowed coat. It may look as though it fits, but it carries none of the wearer's warmth. Jung drew a clear distinction between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is something that can be acquired from the outside: books, schools, traditions, systems of thought. Wisdom appears only when that knowledge passes through the unconscious and is restructured by personal experience. In Jungian psychology, the unconscious is not merely a repository of repressed material, but a reservoir of living energy where experience is integrated into meaning. When an idea touches the unconscious, it no longer retains its original form. It is transformed, made personal, made one's own. Jung once wrote, "Knowledge rests not upon truth alone, but upon error also. Only when an idea has passed through collision, mistake, and personal limitation does it cease to be theory and begin to carry the breath of life. And only then do words gain weight." This explains why some people speak very little, yet every sentence makes others pause. Not because they are more intelligent, but because their words carry a life that has been lived through. You do not merely hear an opinion. You sense a quiet accumulation where understanding has settled, been filtered, and ripened. This ripeness creates a lasting attraction, one that does not require constant updating, does not depend on trends, and does not depreciate with time. There is a story often recalled about Carl Jung in his later years. Even after gaining worldwide recognition and being invited to lecture everywhere, Jung chose to live simply at Bohlingen Tower, building his living space with his own hands, carving words into stone, working with earth, water, and silence. Many were surprised. Why would a great intellectual withdraw from the academic center? But Jung understood that if knowledge does not remain connected to lived experience, it dies. His later reflections did not arise from libraries, but from observing himself aging, facing death, and listening to archetypal images emerging from the unconscious. This is why Jung's late works no longer speak in an explanatory voice, but in a contemplative one. The reader does not merely learn, they feel guided. In modern life, where knowledge is copied at dizzying speed, cultural intelligence becomes a rare form of attraction. You may meet many people who know, but few who leave you feeling richer after a conversation. A person with cultural intelligence does not display their knowledge, nor do they try to prove erudition. They tell a story, connect a detail, ask a question, and suddenly your world opens a little wider. Not because they taught you something new, but because they helped you see the familiar from a deeper angle. From a scientific perspective, this can be explained by how the brain processes experience. Neuroscientific research shows that information tied to emotional and personal experience is stored more deeply and connected to more brain regions than purely theoretical information. When an idea is lived, it does not reside only in language or logic centers, but links to memory, bodily sensation, and emotional response. This multi-layered connectivity is what gives the words of the experienced their greater resonance, even when they speak sparingly. Jung viewed this as a core principle of the individuation process. Individuation is not about becoming different from others, but about becoming fully oneself. And no self can be built from borrowed knowledge. Each person must pass through what they know to see what remains after belief systems collapse. What remains, however little, is wisdom. In social interaction, those with cultural intelligence create a very particular feeling. You do not feel lectured nor judged. You feel invited into a broader space of thought. They do not impose a perspective, but open the possibility of seeing differently. This capacity makes them durably attractive. Without constant updating, without chasing trends, they remain in place in most conversations, because they speak from a ground that has been lived. Cultural intelligence is not limited to books or high art. It appears in how a person understands context, understands people, understands timing. A culturally intelligent person knows when to speak, when to be silent, when a personal story is appropriate, and when it becomes a burden to others. They do not merely know content, they understand the structure of interaction, and understanding structure is a sign of depth. Jung emphasized that modern humans face a paradox. The more information there is, the less meaning. The way out does not lie in accumulating more, but in going deeper into what already exists. Cultural intelligence, therefore, is not the collection of knowledge, but the process of distillation. You discard what is no longer alive for you and keep what has been tested by life. And when you speak from what has been distilled, others hear truth, even if they do not fully agree. The attraction of cultural intelligence lies in the fact that it does not make others feel lacking. On the contrary, it makes them feel expanded. You leave a conversation feeling enriched, not compared or overwhelmed. And in a world where knowledge is often used as a tool of hierarchy, this sense of enrichment is profoundly valuable. Ultimately, cultural intelligence is timeless because it does not depend on temporary contexts. A person may be outdated in information, but not in depth. They may not know every new trend, but they understand the fundamental movements of human life: fear, longing, conflict, meaning, and these change little across generations. When you touch this level, you do not need to run. You only need to be present, and that presence, quiet yet grounded, is one of the deepest forms of attraction Jung ever suggested, even though he rarely used the word attraction. Number 13, the ability to maintain healthy boundaries. And when you have passed through the previous qualities to become more grounded within yourself, healthy boundaries are the clearest way that this groundedness is seen in everyday life. Not loudly, not demonstratively, but in a way that naturally causes others to adjust how they treat you. The ability to maintain healthy boundaries, in the Jungian spirit, is not about building walls to separate yourself from people, but about establishing a clear contour so that closeness does not turn into intrusion and kindness does not dissolve into self-erasure. Many people confuse closeness with entanglement, being good with enduring, connection with always being available. And out of fear of displeasing others, they give too quickly, open too widely, nod before listening to their own body saying no. What is striking is this: when you have no boundaries, others do not feel more loved by you. They only feel that you can be pulled. A psyche that can be easily pulled often creates a vague atmosphere, sometimes too close, sometimes too distant, sometimes overly generous, sometimes suddenly explosive. Healthy boundaries make that atmosphere clear and safe. If this is the first time the self is mentioned in a Jungian sense, it is not the self as everyday ego. The self is the regulating center of the entire psyche, the inner principle guiding a person toward wholeness and unity. When the self becomes more clearly formed, you no longer constantly ask, "What should I do to please others?" but begin to hear a deeper question: what is right for me, and right enough that I can live consistently with it? That consistency gives rise to boundaries. Boundaries are no longer memorized refusals, but a clear sensation in body and mind. This is my limit, this is my rhythm, this is what I can give without losing myself. You can imagine boundaries like a shoreline. The shore does not hate the ocean, does not resist the waves, but because there is a shore, water has form, rhythm, and tide, instead of flooding into chaos. A person without boundaries is like water spilling over, flowing out and out until exhausted, then suddenly becoming dry, irritable, cold. Conversely, someone who builds walls too high is like a sealed embankment, safe but rigid, low in vitality. Healthy boundaries are the right shoreline, soft, clear, capable of holding rhythm. They allow closeness to come and go without destroying structure. Thus, being able to say no without creating conflict is in fact an expression of an inner world that has order. Those who must fight when saying no are often defending themselves emotionally. They are not just refusing a request. They are battling fear of abandonment, fear of judgment, fear of losing position. A person with healthy boundaries, by contrast, says no as simply as stating a fact. No drama, no attack, no lengthy explanations to seek permission for their limit. They can be gentle without being vague. They can be respectful without erasing themselves. This is most clearly seen in very ordinary practical examples. Suppose you have a close friend who habitually unloads emotions late at night, calling unexpectedly, talking at length, and if you do not listen fully, immediately feels abandoned. You have been the one who is always there, so they assume access to you. If you continue listening to the point of exhaustion, resentment will build. One day you will explode or disappear, and they will only remember that you changed, not that you had long been depleted. A healthy boundary here is not cutting off, but setting rhythm. You respond warmly yet clearly. For example, I want to be here with you, but I can only listen for 15 minutes tonight. Tomorrow I'm freer, and I'll call you back. You do not deny them, but you do not offer yourself as an emergency service. At first, they may feel disappointed, but if you remain consistent, something happens. They begin to respect your rhythm, and the relationship becomes more durable because it no longer feeds on one person's exhaustion. Clear boundaries create safety because they reduce guessing games. Much relational tension does not come from major conflicts, but from ambiguity. Am I bothering them? Do they dislike me? They said yes, but do they really want to? When you are clear, others do not need to spend energy reading between lines. They do not have to monitor your mood. They know the rules. And when the rules are clear, intimacy can grow without turning into dependence. Jung also pointed to a subtler point. Boundaries are also a way of not intruding into the unconscious of others. Some people think intimacy means probing deeply, analyzing, uncovering, reading others. But inner life is not an object to be possessed. When you force someone to reveal what has not yet matured, you are intruding. This intrusion triggers withdrawal, even if it cannot be named. People with healthy boundaries often have a rare quality. They respect others' inner territory. They do not demand confession to feel important. They do not use honesty as a pretext to cross lines. They stay close without forcing. And precisely this respect makes others open voluntarily, because they feel safe. Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But boundaries determine whether that transformation is growth or distortion. Without boundaries, you are easily transformed by losing yourself, accommodating, dissolving, then resenting. With boundaries, you are still touched and still learn, but you do not lose your access. You allow relationships to deepen you, not diminish you. This is why people with boundaries are always respected, is not because they are rigid, but because they are clear. Clarity is a powerful signal. I know who I am. I know how much I can give. I know what fits my rhythm, and I do not need anger to protect it. In a world where many either submit to be loved or attack to be heard, the person who sets limits calmly becomes an anchor. Others may not like every boundary you set, but they will trust you more, because you do not betray yourself to purchase temporary peace. If you want to practice in a Jungian spirit, do not begin with phrases, but with where you habitually betray yourself. Where do you say yes the fastest? Where do you explain the most? How afraid are you of others' disappointment? Each time you replace a reluctant "okay" with a calm "no," you make the self clearer. And when the self is clear, boundaries no longer require strain. They become presence, soft yet firm, close without clinging, kind without dissolving. This presence, very quietly, makes you attractive because others feel that with you, they are standing on solid ground. And when that ground is firm enough, you no longer need to constantly check whether you are accepted. Respect arrives naturally because others sense that you stand firmly in yourself, neither invading them nor allowing yourself to be invaded. In your recent relationships, which boundary do you know you need to set, but still hesitate to put into words? If you wish, share briefly in the comments, not to justify yourself, but to acknowledge it to yourself. Sometimes, simply naming a boundary is enough for the self to begin becoming clearer. Number 14. Becoming someone others want to stay with. After passing through inner independence, reconciling with the shadow, maintaining boundaries, liberated joy, elegant presence, and depth that is not hastily exposed, all these qualities ultimately converge at one very simple yet hardest to achieve point: becoming someone others do not need to be held by, yet still want to stay with. Becoming someone others want to stay with, at the deepest level Jung alludes to, is not an effort to keep people, nor a sophisticated relational strategy. It is the natural result of no longer using relationships to fill inner voids. When you no longer manipulate to control, flatter to be chosen, or withdraw to punish, your presence takes on a different quality, lighter, truer, safer. Others are not pulled into you, nor pushed away. And it is precisely this state of neither pulling nor pushing that creates a rare form of attraction. Many things we mistake for affection are in fact unconscious transactions. We care in order to be cared for. We listen to be recognized. We go silent so others will fear losing us. Jung saw this clearly. He believed that when the ego operates from lack, every connection becomes colored by need. And where there is hidden need, tension will eventually appear. The other person may not name it, but they feel bound by an invisible thread. They stay out of fear, guilt, or obligation, not because they are nourished. By contrast, when someone lives closer to the self, they do not need to turn others into supports in order to stand. They can be close without dissolving, love without possessing, be present without intruding. Their presence resembles a sturdy chair in a quiet room. No one is forced to sit, but when tired, people know there is a place to rest. You are not the center of attention, but you become the place others remember when they need to be themselves. There is a fitting metaphor for this state: a large tree in the sun. The tree does not call anyone to rest beneath it, nor does it chase anyone away. It stands there, roots deep, canopy just wide enough. Passers-by, if tired, naturally sit. If not, they continue on, and the tree loses nothing. A person with supportive attraction is the same. They do not cling, demand, or require anyone to stay to validate their worth. And precisely because of this, those who have once rested there rarely forget the feeling. A very ordinary story illustrates this difference. I once knew a man named Anne. Anne was not very talkative, nor did he seem especially attractive at first meeting. Yet strangely, people who had once been close to Anne tended to return, even after long periods apart. When asked why, they answered similarly. With Anne, they did not have to play a role. When they were happy, he did not become overly excited. When they were sad, he did not rush to fix or advise. He listened without absorbing others' stories into himself. If he was tired, he said so. If he could not stay, he was clear, without disappearing, and did not hold anyone with emotion, nor test anyone with coldness. And because of this, no one felt used. They stayed because they were respected as whole human beings, not as roles in his life. This is also clearly seen in a Zen story. An old Zen master lived in the mountains, teaching no doctrine, gathering no disciples. People came to him not for words, but for how it felt to sit beside him. One day someone asked, "What do you teach those who come here?" The master replied, "I teach nothing. I simply do not interfere." Asked further, he said, "When I do not interfere with their fear, desire, or longing, they hear themselves." This reflects the Jungian spirit precisely. Non-intrusive presence allows others to encounter their own self. And there is no gift that makes people want to stay more than that. The highest form of attraction does not lie in making others feel you are special, but in not making them feel diminished. With you, they do not have to guard themselves, prove themselves, or strain to hold position. They can be themselves with both strength and weakness, without fear of being exploited or judged. In a world of rapid interaction, where people are constantly pulled into roles, this feeling becomes priceless. Jung once wrote, "The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct acting from inner necessity." In this context, the new is not an exciting relationship, but a healthy relational space. That space is not created by communication techniques, but by an inner need that has settled. When you do not need others to fulfill something for you to feel okay, relationships become free. And freedom, paradoxically, is what makes people want to return. Not trying to attract, yet impossible to ignore, because you leave no residue of tension. You leave the aftertaste of relief. After leaving you, others do not feel drained, nor compelled to keep performing. They feel fuller, clearer, less defended. Jung believed that when people encounter such a space, they become attached not only to a person, but to a deeper part of themselves they do not always reach. Perhaps this is also the crystallization of the entire journey Jung suggested. True attraction does not come from what you do to others, but from what you no longer do against yourself. When the inner world is sufficient, you do not need to use another's presence to patch inner gaps. You enter relationships not to be saved, but to meet, not to cling, but to share living space. Each encounter then becomes a free choice, not a survival attachment. Someone others want to stay with is not someone who is perfect, but someone who does not require others to be perfect in their presence. There is room for mistakes, for silence, for unremarkable days, and precisely this allows relationships to breathe. In a world where people are constantly judged, pushed to be right, good, enough, being beside someone who does not demand you become someone else is already a deep form of healing. Ultimately, if said briefly, the deepest Jungian attraction is this: you become a place where others can lay down their defenses without fear of harm. And once a person has laid themselves down in such a space, even once, they will always remember it. Not what you said, not what you did, not what you gave them, but the feeling of being in a space where they did not need to shrink to survive. And that is why, very quietly, they want to stay. Looking back at the entire journey we have just taken, one truth becomes increasingly clear. Silent attraction is not manufactured, it is formed. It does not come from trying to speak better, appear more interesting, or do everything possible to be noticed. Those things may impress momentarily, but they rarely last. What lasts, what makes others remember and want to return, is the quality of inner life you carry when you are present. When you cultivate inner independence, reconcile with the shadow, maintain healthy boundaries, honor silence, nurture compassion, wisdom, and stability, you do not merely change how you behave, you change your mode of being. And that mode radiates naturally. You do not need to try to attract because you no longer emit signals of lack. You do not need to cling because your presence is safe enough for others to stay freely. Carl Jung believed that people become whole only when they dare to face their inner life, accepting both light and shadow, rather than polishing a socially pleasing image. And when you step into that wholeness, attraction ceases to be a goal and becomes a consequence. Not the attraction of performance, but the attraction of truth. Not the attraction that makes others dependent, but the attraction that allows them to be themselves in your presence. If you feel this journey could be useful to others, share it. Sometimes a timely perspective can help someone return to themselves. And if you wish to continue accompanying us on the path of exploring Carl Jung's psychological depth, the journey back to the true self, and the awakening of inner attraction, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss future videos. Because when you live from wholeness, you do not only attract people, you attract life itself toward you.